Good evening, everyone. So I hope all of you can see the screen. So what we're going to do today is basically discuss some of the XAT previous year questions. And of course, we will be discussing those from the verbal ability section. My name is Kumud Choudhary. All right. Now, the reason that we have taken a selection of questions rather than all of them is primarily because we don't have enough time to discuss all 3 years. But I'm sure that if you look hard enough, you will find the solutions to all the questions for all the 3 years. Now, XAT is a slightly different sort of an exam. So those of you who are still recovering from CAT and other exams, you will find that XAT throws up a few pleasant and a few unpleasant surprises. So we're specifically going to deal with question types that you may not have faced in the other exams, which is why we are going to start with one of the specialties of XAT, which is rarely seen in other exams, which is the poems. Now, the way that we are going to go about doing this is that I'm going to obviously show you the content and the question. You will have a minute or maybe sometimes a few seconds to answer that question. And after that, we will go about discussing the question and how best to arrive at the solution. Those of you who have general queries about how to approach that and how many questions to answer, I think that is something that we could possibly look at the end. As of now, I would really like to focus on the content. And what I was trying to say is that the questions have primarily been selected for ease of solving. So if you were going to take XAT in these years, then these are the questions that I would probably have tried to solve. Now, let's start with the poetry. Most of us are a little scared of poems because of our experiences in school. Now, in XAT, poems can sometimes be a little challenging, but a lot of times they are pretty scoring types of questions. So I would say give poetry a shot. If you feel that you don't understand the poem at all, it's a different matter entirely. But for the most part, it will not take you too long to read the poem. So if nothing else, it will be a quick job. After that, usually there are only a few questions based on that poem. Some of these questions might be a little challenging, some of them might be very, very simple. Today, we have selected the poems and questions that I feel you should be able to answer. Let's get started with our first one. So, short poem, please take a look at it very, very quickly, and then we will discuss how to answer this question. Okay. I believe that should be enough time to have gone through the poem at least. Maybe you're looking at the question and trying to eliminate the options. But what I would probably start off by doing is to try to figure out the author's message in the poem. So it's basically like any other RC exercise. The only difference is that here you don't really interpret the words literally. Usually they have some sort of a figurative or a metaphorical connotation. So let's start with the first stanza, not paragraph. Sit, drink your coffee here. Your work can wait a while. You are 26 and still have some life ahead. No need for wit, just talk vacuities and I'll reciprocate in kind or laugh at you instead. So you'll have to forgive my poetry reading skills here. But apart from that, what you need to understand is that this is meant to be directed at another person, the reader. And the author is simply trying to say that maybe we should just sit and talk about nothing. So if you have understood that much, then that should give you some confidence that you should be able to answer the questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and simplify each stanza and then try and get to the answer for this particular question. So let's take a break. We'll relax. We don't have to talk about anything important. So here there are a few words that might trouble you. For example, vacuities. But it's okay because as long as you've understood more or less the gist of the first stanza, you're good to go. The second paragraph says that the world is too distressing, opaque, profound, so the world seems to be a little difficult. This 20 minutes rendezvous will make my day. So, this very, very short meeting will make it all better for me. To sit here in the sun with grackles all around, staring with beady eyes, and you 2 feet away. The last two lines are a little difficult for some people to understand because of the word grackles. But overall, the author is simply trying to say that the world is complicated and the short time that I will spend with you is kind of important for me. Now that we've understood this, let's try and figure out the answer to this question. Now, the first option says, let's celebrate our existence and not our work. This might look like a good option for a lot of people. Let's celebrate our existence, okay. But the author is not really saying that we do not need to celebrate our work. The author is trying to say, let's take a break from work, which is very different from saying, let's not celebrate work. Work is not very important. So, option one is something we should be able to cancel out. The second one, I think, is fairly easy to get rid of. Let's eat, drink, and be merry in the lap of nature. There is no lap of nature. The only time that nature has been mentioned is sitting in the sun. But that cannot be interpreted as the lap of nature. So let's look at eliminating option two. The third one, let's create our own meaning in life no matter what. The last three words should help you eliminate option three. No matter what is pretty extreme, isn't it? Let's create our own meaning. No, the author is just saying, let's take a break, sit together, chat. We don't have to discuss anything important. So option three is eliminated. Let's be gibberish. Gibberish means nonsensical. But the author is not saying let's be nonsensical. Yes, we don't have to discuss something very deep and profound, but the author is not promoting irrationality. So option four is gone. So option five kind of works because when you say let's take a break and sit together and chat, basically you're saying, okay, life is a little complicated. Let's take a break and enjoy a few moments, which is what option five is also saying. So from my point of view, it's a fairly easy question because options are easy to eliminate. Let's move on to the next question. Now, this is slightly more specific, but it's based on the same poem. So please look at this last line and see if you can eliminate options. Don't try to select the answer as usual. I am keeping an eye on the YouTube chat. So if you are stating your answers, maybe just kind of keep updating it so that I know you're answering this question and not something else. Okay. All right. Now here, we will need to pay attention to the word grackles. To sit here in the sun with grackles all around, staring with beady eyes and you 2 feet away. Most of us will not know what grackles are, right? So let's imagine that grackles are something. Staring with beady eyes. Now, this sort of a statement usually has a negative connotation because staring is not really good, is it? So we are saying that grackles are staring at us. Clearly, that's not a very pleasant experience that we are supposed to have then. If someone is staring at you, it's supposed to make you feel a little uncomfortable. So that's what you need to make sense out of. Let's try to translate this into slightly simpler language. A rendezvous here is a meeting. Grackles now, I'm just going to tell you, are small blackbirds. And when someone has beady eyes, it's very small glittering eyes, which normally signifies something negative. In any case, staring is not a good thing, right? So when someone stares at you with beady eyes, usually there is something wrong there. It could be suspicion, it could be malice. So keeping this in mind, let's look for grackles, maybe having some sort of ill will towards these two people who are meeting. Okay, so that's a very basic understanding we need to have. The first option actually looks pretty good, right? Because the author is saying, oh, you're just 2 feet away. Let the grackle stare at us, right? So I would probably keep option one. Yeah. Option two says, Grackles are pleasant birds to look at. Well, beady eyes, not so much. I'm not talking about how pleasant it is. Sitting with you is pleasant. Grackles, not so much. The third one. Grackles love to stare at us. This part I can agree with. However, they maintain a 2 feet distance. It is not the grackles who are 2 feet away. It is the other person who is 2 feet away. So I should be able to eliminate option 3 as well. Now, option 4. A small bird-like grackle can give us lots of happiness. Am I deriving my happiness from grackles? No, I'm deriving my happiness from the meeting. The grackles are kind of getting in the way of that meeting. So I should be able to eliminate 2, 3, and 4. Now, let's look at option 5. Grackles, like humans, love to bask in the sun. Well, maybe, but we don't really know whether the grackles are there because they love basking in the sun. And that's definitely not the point that the author is making. So, option 1, we had already said was good. Option 2, because of the word pleasant, we can get rid of. Option 3, they don't maintain a 2 feet distance. Option 4, grackles cannot give us happiness. And option 5, not the main point. Plus, we can't really derive it from the poem. So, those of you who said option 1, which quite a few of you have said, option 1 is correct. Okay, so well done. As I said, poetry can be a bit challenging. I think the first question was slightly easier to answer as compared to this one. Now, this is a poem from XAT 2022. So someone was asking how many years or which years are we going to do? We've more or less taken 3 years, but I have tried not to spoil the XAT 2023 paper so much. So it's primarily going to be 21, 22, maybe a few from 20. Please read this poem, very short, maybe things you can identify with. So I think maybe about 40, 45 seconds is good enough to read the poem. The language is very, very simple. So once you have read it, all we really need to do is to eliminate options, right? So see if you can select an option for this particular poem. Okay, seems to be an easy question because at least a few of you have hit upon the answer. Okay. Wow. Okay, a lot of you have hit upon the answer. So very encouraging on the whole. Let's look at the story because it is a story, right? There are two people who have apparently met in a library. They looked at each other, they smiled, it's just like a movie, and they felt that they have probably fallen in love. But as usual, things have not moved along very smoothly, and they realize that they have been mistaken and that perhaps they have made some wrong assumption about each other. Why am I saying some wrong assumptions? Because it says in the fourth line, something that seems like love, but you loved me, if that's the word, because you thought that I was other than I was. So clearly they have misunderstood each other. Yeah. Now, which one cannot be inferred? I think option 1 definitely can be inferred because it clearly says we'd been mistaken. So option 1 is out. We don't fall in love with with others but ourselves. Well, it doesn't really talk about loving yourself. So I think option 2 is a fairly good candidate, as a lot of you also thought. We fall in love with strangers. Well, between two strangers in a library, something that seems like love happened. So yes, we can fall in love with strangers. So eliminate. The fourth one, glancing and smiling, that's how love began. So I think option 4 is also clearly inferred. Now, if you are confused, it is most likely between 2 and 5, if at all. The idea of love is different for the parties involved. It's a little difficult to derive this, but if you look at line number 4 and 5, something that seems like love, but you loved me if that's the word. So clearly, it seems like they're a little unsure about what this concept of love is. So, option 5, with some degree of processing, can be derived, but there is nothing about loving thyself or oneself. And so, between 2 and 5, I think 2 definitely cannot be inferred. And would you agree that this is an easy question? So, we've done 2 poems. Not difficult, language is simple, no complicated vocabulary, and an easy question as well. So please do not stay away from poetry. Yes, sometimes it can be challenging, but a lot of times, as I said, could be very scoring as well. All right, now, unfortunately, we do have to move on to our regular reading comprehension. But I have selected a passage that most of you are going to find very, very simple to read. But in XAT, unlike some of the other exams, it is usually the questions which are slightly tricky. We have all faced indirect questions. We know that questions will not directly give you the answer, and so will be the case here also. So, for each question, we're going to try and identify what type of question it is. But before that, let's read the passage. There is no shortcut. Please understand, you have to understand the passage. So, this is from XAT 2021. Take a few minutes to read this. Okay, so I would probably take about a minute at the most to read this paragraph, not the entire passage. And by this time, we know that we are definitely talking about multitasking. What we need to understand is what is being said about multitasking. So, this is what we call the argument, right? So, when we say that multitasking increases the production of the stress hormone cortisol, this is the very first line. We should get a sense, we should get a sense that multitasking is not good according to the author and the research that is being presented. Okay. So, if you look at the fourth line, look at the way that the sentences start. To make matters worse. So, multitasking is bad, but to make things worse, the prefrontal cortex has a novelty bias, meaning that its attention can be easily hijacked by something new. Right? So, multitasking, bad, is what I need to understand from this one. Now, this kind of just explains why it is bad. So, by the time that we get to the end, where it starts talking about endogenous opioids, all to the detriment of our staying on task, we start losing focus because of some complicated words here and there. But all that we're saying is multitasking, bad. So, if you got that much, then I think you're ready to move on to the next paragraph. All right. So, please understand the argument. Let's move on. There are a few questions coming my way, which I am noticing, but I will prefer to answer that a little bit later. So, let's just focus on the content here. Okay. So, multitasking, bad. Create some sort of an addiction loop. It actually gets in the way of focus and productivity. All right. So, please remember that for the future. Look at paragraph 2. Okay. Any idea what the author is trying to tell us here? And how are you supposed to communicate with me? Just type in the live chat and I can see your comments for the most part. Okay. So we're comparing the good old days, I think, with what is happening today. Earlier, since the phone was attached to the wall, people didn't expect you to be reachable at all times, but now you are expected to be reachable at all times, something that a lot of us are not very happy with. So look at the last sentence here. Yeah, it is about how the expectations related to reaching people have changed. And that's what we need to understand from this paragraph. Those same people would have let a landline on their desk go unanswered during a meeting. So different were the expectations for reachability. Yeah. So expectations regarding reachability is what this paragraph is about. So again, if you've understood this much, you're good. Let's move on to the last paragraph. Sorry, my mistake. Okay, so we have our first question here. Very specific question, relates to the last para that we just read. You can refer to the paragraph. In fact, it would be good if you do. Okay, I like all the responses I've received so far. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Okay, so it revolves around the main idea for paragraph 2, more or less. It is expectations for reachability that we need to understand. Okay, now let's look at our first option. Cell phones allow people to multitask. Okay, but this is not what the author is trying to highlight. All right, we have to specifically say, why would someone do something as irrational as picking up the phone just to say, I'm sorry, I can't talk now, I'm in a meeting? Okay, so we have to explain that behavior. This is not actually multitasking. You're just saying that I cannot talk to you. I have to focus on a different task. So, definitely not an example of multitasking. Option 1 gone. The second one seems like an answer that we might want, but this is not what the passage is telling us. So, option 2 also easy to eliminate. It is convenient for people to send a message. If it were so, then why would you actually pick up the call? You should just send a message. So, option 3 is easy to eliminate. Because if you carry a cell phone, you have to reply. This is what expectations are all about. Because you have a cell phone, you are expected to be reachable. So, I would keep option 4. Now, this one, it conveys that the receiver is a busy person. Well, this is again not what the passage is trying to highlight. Okay, it's not to communicate, oh, my schedule is so packed. Not that. It is the fact that you have to pick up your phone because you have the phone. So, option 5, eliminated. Option 4 is your answer. So, I think most of you have figured out option 4. Now, some of you picked option 3 as well. And I think by now you should have understood why it is not option 3. If you could send a message, why would you pick up the phone? So this does not explain the phone picking up behavior. And that's why option 3 cannot be your answer. Okay. And option 1, again, one of you had picked option 1. Cell phones allow people to multitask, but you're not actually multitasking because you're just picking up the phone to say that I cannot focus on you. So not your answer. Now, there are a few more questions based on the same passage. So please take a look at this one. This one is what we call maybe a logical structure question, because they're asking you, why has the author said this? Again, please refer to this paragraph if you need to. For specific questions, it's always good to go back to the text. And in fact, for such questions, logical structure variety, it is always good to not even look at the options and have a shadow answer first. So when I read this, now more people have cell phones than have toilets. Are we trying to say that, the number of cell phones is huge? Is that what it is? Or are we trying to say that toilets are less important than cell phones? So please come up with a shadow answer or your own interpretation of the text before you look at the options. Now, most of the answers are either option 3 or option 4, most of it. Okay. So I think 1 and 2 are easy to eliminate. The usage of toilets is limited while cell phones are used all the time. We're not saying the usage of toilets is limited, so I think 1 is easy to get rid of. Everybody wants to stay connected using cell phones. Well, the word everybody kind of tells us that this may not be the answer, right? So 1 and 2 easy to eliminate. Now let's talk about 3 and 4. Need to be connected is more pronounced now. The word pronounced means that it is more important or that it is more obvious now than it was before. Now, option 4 says cell phones have become a bigger necessity. Are we really trying to say that cell phones are more important than toilets? I don't think so. It says that this has created an implicit expectation that someone should be able to reach you when it is convenient for them to reach you, right? Ultimately, it is about reachability. It is about communicating with people when you want to communicate with them. We're not really comparing the importance of toilets versus cell phones. So that is why option 4 should be eliminated. Now, the number of cell phone users has increased over time. I think only one of you has actually picked this option. Okay, so we'll go back to 3 in just a bit. When it says now more people have cell phones than have toilets, basically we're trying to say that a lot of people have cell phones, right? So any ideas on why option 3 probably is not the answer? So if I tell you option 3 is not the answer, any reason that you can think of why it is not the answer? Okay. So whenever there's a comparison, okay, whenever there's a comparison, the need to be connected is more pronounced now, right? First of all, more pronounced now as compared to when. That is one thing, right? So be careful about comparisons. Usually, comparisons are option traps. So you have to be very, very, very sure that that is a comparison being made. Okay. Now, the fifth one says the number of cell phone users has increased over time. This is a very, very normal inference to derive, right? When you say now more people have cell phones than have toilets, clearly the number of cell phones have increased. No problem. Now, if I look at 3 another way, is it really true that earlier people did not want to be connected? Perhaps they also wanted to be connected at earlier times. It's just that you managed your expectations slightly better. So, here, one thing that we need to understand is that we're not really comparing cell phones versus toilets. Okay. So, option 1 is gone because of that. Okay. Now, the need to be connected is more pronounced now, is a different sort of comparison. Now versus then. What has really changed between now and then? It is not the need to be connected, it is the expectations regarding when you can reach people. And that is why option 3 should be eliminated. The fourth one, again, notice the comparison. Cell phones have become a bigger necessity as compared to what? Toilets. The comparison is not between cell phones versus toilets. So that is why option 4 is gone. And that is why finally we should pick option 5 as the answer. This one, difficult question, because I'm pretty sure that in a tough situation where you have only 1 minute, I think a lot of us will pick 3 as the answer, because the need to stay connected sounds like it's related to cell phones. So this question, if you get wrong, completely understandable. Now here, I do want to raise another point. In that, there is also some loss of marks for not attempting the question. So what do you guys think? In a question like this where you think you can get to the answer, what should you do? Should you leave it, or should you say that no, I must attempt it, because if I don't, then I will lose marks for that? So is it better to leave a question, or is it better to answer the question if you are slightly unsure? What would you say? You're not sure of the answer, you're stuck between two options, leave or answer. What would you do? Okay, in case you're confused, please do not worry about leaving questions. If you're not sure of your answer, if you're absolutely stuck between two options, don't force yourself to pick an answer. You should, no, don't force yourself to pick an answer. Attempt it only when you have a logical reason to eliminate an option. So, for example, here, did we actually go to option number 5 and say, this is not the answer because? Feel free to leave questions if you are not sure. Okay, moving on. Again, inference-based question, which of the following can be best inferred from the passage? Marked for review. Okay, yeah, you can mark it for review, but the point is you still have to make a call, right? Should I leave? Should I attempt? So if you're unsure, still leave. Here is the text for your reference. Yeah, that's a very valid point. The negative marks for leaving are far less than the negative marks for incorrect answers. Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's take a look at this. Again, in that, the passage might be complicated, the passage might be simple, but we can be pretty sure that the correct answer is often paraphrased. It will not use exactly the same words as the text. So please come up with a shadow answer. What we have to understand here is, what does multitasking actually do? Look at the last sentence. Instead of reaping the big rewards that come from sustained focused effort, we reap empty rewards from completing 1,000 little sugar coated tasks. So, what is the author really saying? Let's translate it to simpler English. Multitasking makes us feel like we've done so many things, but actually does not get the job done. So, once I have understood this, I can move on to the answer options. The first option, single tasking makes you do one. Multitasking helps you complete thousands of tasks. But that's actually what the author is opposing. Multitasking does not get you to complete any real tasks. So I think one is pretty easy to eliminate. The second one, multitasking takes you all over. I would probably stop here and say, what does that really mean? I'm not even sure of how to interpret this option. Single tasking helps you achieve some goals. Second part we can be happy with, right? But option two, a little hazy. So I'm going to just kind of keep it there and say, let me move on to option three. Multitasking helps you move towards different goals. Single tasking helps you achieve the one. Now, option three, I should be able to eliminate because what the author is trying to say is that multitasking does not really help to get tasks done. When it says we instead reap empty rewards from completing 1,000 little sugar coated tasks, are you actually getting work done? No, you just feel like you've done a lot of tiny things. They're empty rewards. It's not worth it. So, option three, we should be able to eliminate. Option four, multitasking gives you a feeling of achieving many things. Yes, that is what the author is saying. That is what empty rewards from completing 1,000 little sugar coated tasks is. But single tasking actually focuses on the getting the job done. So, option four looks good. Option five, multitasking gives you happiness, single tasking gives you satisfaction. So, multitasking may give you happiness, single tasking gives you satisfaction, perhaps, but nowhere in this particular paragraph can I use any sentences to support option 5. Happiness versus satisfaction? Not really. All that it is saying is that multitasking leads to overstimulation of your brain. As a result, you're not able to focus. So you feel like you've done a lot of little things, but actually you haven't done much. So once I have understood this, I should be able to say, okay, option 2 does not quite capture that meaning. Option 3, multitasking does not help you move towards the goal at all. It distracts you from the goal. Option 4, which some of you, about 1/3 of the population has picked, is the right answer. Option 5, happiness versus satisfaction, is not what the author is talking about. So, option 4. What I was trying to say is that the text was very easy, questions are complicated, and please make sure that you interpret what the text is saying before you look at the options. The options will always twist the words. So that is difficult because it truly tests your comprehension. Okay, do few questions, but just try and get them right. Moving on then. Our favorite part, we will be doing some grammar. Yes. Now, in case people are panicking about grammar, on the whole, XAT has very few grammar questions. Okay. And usually I have seen that there is one slightly easy question, difficult sort. And I think you'll be able to figure out the easy versus difficult ones. So might as well get started with the first grammar question. Please take a look at this. Read the following statements and answer the question that follows. And the question that follows is, which of the above sentences have incorrect usages of articles? You don't have to worry about anything else apart from articles. Okay, so far I see one response on the chat. It's not a very difficult question. Okay, so the way that I would go about solving grammar questions, first of all, just full disclosure, my grammar is on the whole pretty bad. I have read a lot of books, so I have a sense of what sounds right. But on the whole, in terms of the technicalities of grammar, not so great. So what I would normally do is I would go by those sentences which are definitely wrong. So can you tell me, out of statements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, forget the options, okay? We'll get to the options in just a bit. Which sentence is definitely wrong? I mean, it just does not make sense. Okay, so I would probably say the sixth one. Would you rather go out or watch a TV? You don't watch a TV, right? We watch television. We watch TV, we watch television, we watch something else, but watch a TV doesn't make any sense. So since I have to pick incorrect articles, I would probably say, okay, I'm pretty sure that the sixth one is wrong. Therefore, my choice lies between C and E. Yeah. So if I have narrowed it down to these two options, it kind of makes life a little bit easier. So now let's figure out the errors. The problem with this question is that you can't really memorize these rules. A lot of these are just conventions. Focus on this part. We are going to a restaurant, but we haven't decided which one. This is okay because you're going to some restaurant, a non-specific one. So no problem, this is correct. The second one might have caused some difficulty for people. We went to the toilet. All right. The toilet is specific. Behind a tree. The tree is non-specific. I understand that most of us would end up saying we went to the toilet behind the tree. How can we be very specific about the toilet if we are not specific about the tree? Nevertheless, this is always possible. I'm just saying, this is not definitely wrong. It is not definitely wrong. Why is it not definitely wrong? Because the toilet is specific, but the tree is non-specific. Okay, so 2 unfortunately is not the answer. Let's look at the third one. It was the November after we went to Indonesia. It's a specific November, the one after we went to Indonesia. So 3 is in fact correct. The fourth one, I was hoping people would pick up on this one. We traveled to, what is wrong? We traveled to UK? We traveled to US? Come on, what is missing, people? It is the UK. Okay, so for all plural sounding countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, the Maldives, you have to use the. Yes. So 4 is definitely incorrect. And remember, I had said that 6 is definitely incorrect. So automatically, I kind of know what the answer is now. So it is the UK, the United States, the Maldives. Please remember, all plural sounding countries will take the. Can you come up with a few more examples? Plural sounding countries or regions? Okay, there also the Gulf, the United Arab Emirates, anything else? Anything that doesn't start with United? Okay, so not all proper nouns actually. It's very, very complicated. But just remember, all plural sounding country names, the Philippines, perfect. The Seychelles, perfect. All plural sounding country names, please put the. Okay, so that's a rule. We can be the Netherlands, perfect, excellent. Now, the fifth one. She drinks medicine by a liter. This is an idiom. You want to say that she drinks a lot of medicine. So it is by the liter. It's an idiom. You cannot change it. And the sixth one, obviously, would you rather go out or watch TV? Okay. The Lakshadweep Islands, yes. Oh, you don't say the Mexico. Mexico is not a plural name. Just saying. So out of these options, therefore, since we know 4, 5, and 6 are incorrect, 4, 5, 6, option C is the answer. I think on the whole, you've done fairly well. According to me, this is one of the easier grammar questions, but we will do a few difficult ones as well. Let's move on. Typically, we're not very good with prepositions. Okay, so the preposition related questions are a little challenging. Please try this one. Again, incorrect usage is what we are going to go with. Okay. Los Angeles. Actually, Los Angeles is Well, the city of angels. So no, not really. So with regard to cities, we never do that usually, apart from a few exceptions, like The Hague. The People's Republic of China, yes, definitely. All right, now let's move on to this question. Incorrect usage of prepositions. And please focus on the directions. You need to pick the ones that are incorrect, not the correct ones. Okay. Now, here again, I think the easiest way to look at it is to find a very obvious error, right? So let's not go with anything that's hazy. For example, the sixth one is definitely wrong. They are leaving to England soon. We all know that that's not correct. So I can definitely narrow it down to options 2 and 3. I hope that we have done that bit. Options 2 and 3. Yes. Okay. Now, let's look at what is wrong with the rest. Focus on the specific highlighted parts, right? The manager was sitting at the desk. You do always say at the desk because you don't sit on the desk, right? You don't sit in the desk. So this is fine. Please note, work is always superior to or inferior to something else. So it's not just work, anyone. Superior to and inferior to, always. So the second one is also correct. Similarly, you prefer something to something else. Santosh, that's absolutely correct. So this is incorrect. I prefer coffee to tea. You can also say sometimes that I like coffee more than tea. That's also fine. But prefer to. Prefer X to Y. The fourth one, she was accused of. You are found guilty of and you're accused of. So fourth is incorrect. Fifth one, this is fine. Exception to something. And the sixth one we had already decided is definitely wrong. So they're leaving for England soon, which means that 3, 4, and 6 is the one that we want, which is option 3. So well done. A lot of you did pick option 3. Okay. This is actually the kind that I find very difficult because when it says which of the following sentences are grammatically correct, I don't know what to look for. So here I would probably want to go through all the simple grammar rules that I have learned. For example, subject verb agreement, pronouns, tenses, modifiers, the usual stuff. Sorry about that. You have to pick the correct questions, sorry, the correct sentences. Okay. Righto. Now, have you any clothes to dispose of? Dispose of means to get rid of. So one seems to be okay. I saw a pleasant dream last night. Sounds right on the whole. But sounds right does not always mean is right. So that is why I thought that this one is a slightly more challenging question. First one, correct. But you don't see a dream, you have a dream. So I had a pleasant dream last night. The third one, I have done it many a time safely. Many a times is an expression that I've heard a lot of people use. But please remember, whenever we use right, many is followed by a singular word. So I have done it many times, or I have done it many a time. You have to use either of these expressions. So I had a pleasant dream. I have done it many times, or I have done it many a time safely. So we have 2 and 3 as incorrect. Now, this could possibly get you to narrow down options, but we might as well go through the whole list. Cope up. Students struggle to cope up with academic pressure. Very, very common one. Unfortunately, cope up is not correct. Students struggle to cope with academic pressure. So we do not cope up, we cope. The fifth one, you need not give. Now, here, a lot of us will say, don't we say you need not to give? Again, you need not give is absolutely correct. There's nothing we need to change here. And my friend is good at playing football. You are good at things and you are bad at things. So, those of you who picked 1, 5, and 6, which some of you did do, brilliant. It is option 5. Any specific questions about any of these we can always address later, but unfortunately, we cannot do a grammar lesson right now. So let us move on to critical reasoning. That should be fun. Now, critical reasoning, if you remember, usually consists of a very, very short paragraph followed by 1 or 2 questions at most. Critical reasoning is not directly tested in CAT. Okay, sorry, there was a question about this. Dispose of, no, it should not have a double F. Dispose of is always with a single F. Yeah, I know. Haw is the right one. Okay, moving on to critical reasoning. Short paragraph followed by 1 or 2 questions. Critical reasoning in that, I think, is a little challenging. So if you're not absolutely sure or you're running out of time, I would probably look at doing critical reasoning at the very end. Okay. Please try this one. This is from 2020. It's a very short paragraph. And it's perfectly all right if you don't understand what El Nino is. Do is silent here. I'm not really sure what the question is. Okay. Now, I think we have received enough responses. So, first of all, whenever you have a CR or a critical reasoning question, please always read the question first. All right. The moment you know that it's an inference question, uh, Okay. So the moment that there is an inference question, what you're really looking for is logical certainty, which means that if there is any new information, you need to eliminate it. If there are any comparisons that the original text does not make, then you need to eliminate that option. Okay, so just make sure that you do not introduce anything new. So on the whole, we're saying that the global temperatures are rising. On top of the long-term warming trend, temperatures have been buoyed by a moderate El Nino event. So when we say have been buoyed by a moderate El Nino event, what exactly are we saying here? This particular line. See, buoyed means raised, to raise up. Okay. So the temperatures have been further raised by an El Nino event that is likely to persist through the rest of the year. So there is a long-term warming trend and there is also the contribution of the El Nino. Keeping this in mind, let's look at the first option. The El Nino event causes global surface temperatures to rise in the long term. Sounds like a good option, doesn't it? But what you have to understand is that long-term warming trend is very different from the impact of the El Nino. So option one, we should be able to eliminate, hopefully. Option one, we should be able to eliminate, hopefully, because the long-term warming is separate from the impact of the El Nino. That is why it's not option one. Now, the second one, this has a comparison more than, less than, better than, worse than. Whenever there's a comparison, usually an option trap, please double check that option. I'm not saying that it's never the answer. It's just very often not the answer. Moderate versus weak, no comparison. So get rid of option two. Now, this information is not there. We know that in 2019, the El Nino has had an impact. Did it affect temperatures in 2016 and 17? Can't say. So this is a very classic thing that they do. They will tell you that something happened this year. That does not mean it did not happen in the last year or the previous year or it will not happen in the future. So please be very careful. From an affirmative statement, do not derive a negative statement. So we can't say this. Option 4. The long-term trend is unrelated to the El Nino. The long-term trend is separate from the impact of the El Nino. So option 4 we should keep. Now, let's look at option 5, which also seems to be pretty popular, huh? So, can anyone tell me why we should not pick option 5? Because we shouldn't. But what is the clue that tells us that this is not the answer? It's a very big clue. There's the one word. Can you identify that word? Why not option 5? Okay. Perfect. Palak, that's excellent. So the word is constant. We don't really know. Yeah, perfect, perfect. The constant rate is a problem. We don't know if the temperatures have been increasing at a fixed rate. So that should tell us that option 5 is definitely out of scope and therefore option 4 is the answer. So if we just use option elimination, it's very, very simple. Okay. 2016 or 17 was higher. Oh, okay. Right. So they've been increasing at a constant rate for 3 years. So what we are saying is, on the whole, just give me 1 minute. So it says it's the third warmest behind only 2016 and possibly 2017. So yeah, in a way, it does suggest that temperatures in the past have been more or higher. True. What I'm trying to highlight here is that in general, there are certain methods that you can use to eliminate options. So when it says constant rate, even if we did have some information and even if this line was missing, we would still not be able to say that the rate of increase was the same. Okay, so constant comparisons, these are just red flags you need to be aware of. All right, please try this one. It's a conclusion question. In grammar, usually there are only about 2 or 3 questions. Critical reasoning, there could be more. Okay. If El Nino comes in the future and then it increases the global temperature, see, when we say related, it basically means that the two are kind of correlated, or maybe that one thing causes the second thing. That's what we are saying. But when we say that on top of the long-term warming trend, there is also this other temporary event that is raising temperatures, it means that it is more a coincidence than those two being related and constantly happening together. So it's clearly saying that long-term warming is separate and the El Nino is separate. That is why we are saying they're not related. It's just that in this year, they have coincided. What does buoyed mean? Buoyed means raised in this context. Okay. Right. Now, this is a slightly more technical passage. On the whole, we are saying something about the geological cycle, some sort of a cycle. So initially, we thought that the cycle was 30 million years. Then we said, okay, maybe it's not so much. But now we figured out that on the whole, it is 27.5 million years for one geological cycle. Now, this is one piece of information. Okay. The second piece of information is that this particular mark is when mass extinctions happen too. There is a geological cycle that happens, that takes place over the course of 27.5 million years. And around this time, mass extinctions also happen. Two separate pieces. Let's look at the first option. When we say sporadically means intermittently, unpredictably, and there is one word there that should help you eliminate the first option: disasters. We're talking about a geological cycle. We're not talking about disasters. So that's completely out of scope. So let's get rid of option 1. The second and the third sound very similar. Not all species go extinct once every 27.5 million years. Maybe that is true, but we can't really say this because it says that mass extinctions happen around the same time. We don't know whether that means all the species go extinct or whether it means that some species go extinct. That information is not there. And therefore, we should, get rid of option 2 and 3. Pretty much the same reason. So I hope you understand when it says mass extinctions happen, it could mean 100% of the species die, or it could mean 20% die or 50% die. We don't really know. That leaves us with 4 and 5. Please note this word. Pulse between geological events is constant. Is it constant? Somewhere it says pulses of 26.2 to 30.6 million years, right? But I would say that it definitely does not mean that the pulse is constant. So remember, last question, again, same word, this question, same word, red flag. Let's eliminate the fourth one. Now, when we say correlated does not mean cause and effect. Here, we are just trying to say that these two events are seen to happen at the same time. So mass extinctions and geological pulse are correlated because around this mark is when mass extinctions happen too. Geological pulse, mass extinctions are observed around the same time. That's all. So please be careful of the word correlated. Correlated does not mean cause and effect, and therefore option 5 is good. So now, Any specific questions that you want me to go back to before I give you a bit of a challenge? Any specific questions you want me to go back to? Okay. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is to give you a very, very short text and a few questions based on that text. Okay. As I said, it's a bit of a challenge. All right. Which means that it's not going to be easy. So you have to decide whether you want to answer it, whether you don't want to answer it. You also have to decide if you want to answer it, what is the answer. Okay. And then at the end of it, we will discuss it. But before we go there, I just want to check if there's anything you want to talk about in terms of grammar, critical reasoning, RC, poetry. I think the only thing that we haven't really done is parajumbles, but you've done enough parajumbles, I'm pretty sure. So that's why I didn't really get that. Um, have you any clothes? Yeah, do is silent in that sentence. I'm really sorry, Meera. I didn't understand which question you were referring to. Yes. Have you any clothes is equal to saying, do you have any clothes? All right. Okay. Let's move on. So I am going to, keep kind of hiding my screen for a bit so that you don't see any of the answers. Basic grammar rules. Um, at the risk of, promoting the IMS material, if you do have the IMS material, the grammar module is pretty well designed. So if you have that, please go through it because we've covered all the basic grammar rules there. And if you don't want to make that effort also, if you could just go through the pre-class videos on grammar, they're pretty fantastic. Now, if you do not have the IMS material, then I would suggest that you write down these 5 areas that you need to cover. I mean, they will help you answer at least the easy to moderate questions. And you can just Google it. Okay. So this information is available everywhere. Subject verb agreement, pronouns. In fact, I'll just type it out on the screen so that it's easier for people. Okay. All right. So some of this stuff is more common as compared to others. Now, when we say modifiers, here there is one place that you could possibly also look for articles. Now, these two areas, prepositions and verbal idioms, and articles, there are just too many rules. So there is very little theory that will help you understand articles and prepositions because a lot of it is simple convention. But subject verb agreement, pronouns, modifiers, and tenses, these are rule bound. So these are areas that you can definitely look at. Okay, now let's move on to the challenge bit. Okay, so there are only about 2 questions that I want you to answer. Please take a look at this. Very short text, another poem. It's not because I love poems, it's just that I think it's very easy to get through them quickly. Okay, let me switch over to the next question and then we will talk about the poem and the questions together. All right, going back. So I hope everyone's picked an answer. It's just 2 questions, and typically poems have just 1 or 2 questions associated. Okay, let's get started. So some of it is a little metaphorical. All right, but I think on the whole, you've done well. The author is trying to say here, on the whole, let's break it down. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice, right? The author thinks it will be fire. Now, are we talking about fire in a literal sense? We don't really know. So, desire is equal to fire. All right. So, this part we need to figure out. That is one. Let's move on. But if it had to perish twice, so if, we could destroy the world twice, I think I know enough of hate to know that for destruction, ice is also great. So, what is ice here? Hatred. So, fire is desire, ice is hatred. Both of them can destroy the world. But according to the author, desire, which is equal to fire, is more likely. Okay, having understood this, now let's look at what the poet will agree with. Okay, initially I got a lot of mixed responses, but a lot of you did pick A and B. Greed can destroy one's world. Now, the trick to this question is, which of the following statements will the poet agree with the most? The most. So you have to figure out what is the author's main point. So when the author says very clearly that I hold with those who favor fire, fire is equal to desire, which could mean greed. We're not really sure. B says both desire and hate can create self-doubt. So I think this is slightly easier to get rid of, right? Because self-doubt is not being talked about. Now, C says hatred destroys what desire cannot. Would C be accurate? I think I know enough of hate to know that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. So, in case the world had to perish twice, I would probably say desire is what is going to destroy the world, but if desire doesn't, then hatred will. So, C is also a very likely candidate, honestly. Nevertheless, the poet will agree with the most, is what we have to focus on. Let's look at D. Desire overpowers hatred. Doesn't say that. There's no comparison between which is more powerful in terms of destructive powers here. So let's get rid of D. Ambition is more powerful than envy. Well, ambition could be desire, envy could also be desire, but this is a comparison that we can't really derive from the poem. So ultimately, I will be caught between A and C. And the answer is A. Why is the answer A? Because the poem clearly says, I hold with those who favor fire. So, according to the poet, yes, hatred is powerful, but desire is more powerful and is more likely to destroy one's world. So, all right. Any questions about this one? Okay, let's move on. Now, this I thought was a pretty tough question, but I think that's my failing because I'm just not good with titles. The thing is, which is the most unsuitable title for the poem, right? Let's look at how you decide this. Annihilation means destruction. Okay, annihilation means destruction. So, are we talking about annihilation and what could possibly annihilate the world? Maybe. B says love and detest, a tale of destruction. Are we talking about love? Love could be equal to desire, perhaps, and detest could equal hatred. So, since we're talking about desire and hate, both of them are powerful forces and can destroy the world. I would say, okay, B could also really work. Okay, so on the whole, this is tough. Absolutely. So we're talking about destruction of the world by fire or ice. Fire is desire, ice is hatred. Let's go back. This we got rid of. You understand why? Because we are talking about destruction. We are talking about desire and hatred. So I would say, okay, 2 is also not the answer. Uh, how can we say desire can destroy more than hate? No, it's not a comparison in terms of how powerful it is. But since it is according to the poet, right? Now, here I'm just going back to the previous question, people. Since the question was asking us, what would the poet agree with the most? Look at the fourth line. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. So if I really had to make a choice, gun to my head, I would say desire is more likely to destroy the world. And that is why we picked that option. Okay. How could we name a poem like a research paper? Wow. Okay. That's a perspective that I have not yet taken. But when you are looking at the suitable title, one of the things I always tell people to keep in mind is that we don't now pick titles like we did in schools. So it's okay if it sounds like the title for a research paper as long as it is pertinent to the topic. You don't have to come up with creative and lyrical sounding titles anymore. Not required at all. Okay. So annihilation because we're talking about destruction. Love and detest because we're talking about desire and hatred. Let's move on. How the world ends. Well, it's not really talking about how exactly, but it does kind of give you why or in what direction or due to what the world might end. So maybe this. Destruction by fire and ice, I think this is pretty suitable. So this is out. And emotional destruction of the world. A lot of people would probably say this kind of seems like a suitable title because we are talking about desire and hatred. But the destruction of the world is not emotional. It is due to these emotions that the world is being destroyed. So option 5 is the most unsuitable title simply because it is a distortion of what the author is saying. It's not like emotional atyachar or emotional destruction. It is destruction of the world due to certain powerful emotions, which is very different from saying emotional destruction, and hence option 5. Now, if I had to decide whether I wanted to answer this question, this is clearly a question I would not have answered because my personal feeling is all the title related questions. And the question itself makes it a little challenging because it's not even asking you for the most suitable title, it's asking you for the most unsuitable. So it's kind of like an except question. All right. So with this, I come to an end of the question types that I wanted to cover. I mean, if we had to do anything further, it would just be in terms of quantity rather than quality. So at this point, if you have any particular questions, feel free to post them and I will try my best to answer them. If I can't answer it, then I will probably try to refer you to some sources which might give you the answers. And if I completely have no idea, I'll say that as well. But if you have no further questions, then I guess you could probably log off and refer to it or refer to the video if you need to later. And if you want me to go back to any particular question, we could do that as well. I agree. Title questions, according to me, are also fairly subjective. I feel that main idea or primary purpose questions are usually a little easier. Yeah, so I completely agree with that. I mean, you could do title questions if the titles are very differentiated and you're very sure of what the subject matter is. But in a case like this, I think this is slightly vague and maybe this one is best left instead of guessing. Can I take more such sessions? Unfortunately, it's not up to me. So I'm not really sure how to comment on that. Okay, so I do want to leave you with a few things that you could possibly do before that. Number one, if you have prepared for CAT, then let's say that you're fairly well prepared for XAT as well. I would just probably expect you to go through the past XAT papers. I found that the level of difficulty between CAT and XAT is not very, very different anymore. There are a few vocabulary questions as well, but again, very, very few. And usually the vocab questions are slightly on the more challenging side. They're what we call the closed paragraph questions. So these are also not words that we are likely to be familiar with in everyday life. So the solution to that is not really to start mugging up all the words. That is something that you could possibly do for other exams, perhaps like the NMAT where there are direct vocab questions. But in order to answer maybe one or two vocabulary questions, I don't think it's worth mugging up an entire word list. So just focus on the reading, solving previous year's papers. And while solving these papers and passages, if you can start writing down the lists of words that have appeared in the previous years, that would be a better way. Okay, so what we need to keep in mind that the sectional cutoffs are not going to add up to the overall cutoff. The sectional cutoffs for all the sections are pretty low. So if VARC is your strength, then the task is not just to clear the cutoff. The task is actually to, exceed the cutoff to the extent possible. For most of you, the last few days should be devoted to decision making because that is the section that all of you are going to be unfamiliar with. Decision making is to a great extent a little subjective because of the types of questions that you encounter there. So please practice DM. Don't think that you will be able to manage it in the last week. I mean, we're nearly there. So focus all your energies there. Don't start mugging up word list. Just start solving the previous year's XAT papers. That's the best way to prepare. And XAT, like a lot of other exams, is slightly unpredictable in the sense that, we cannot always say how many questions and, what kind of questions there will be. It has remained fairly stable over the years, but there might be changes. So always be prepared for surprises. One of the reasons that XAT RCs might be easier for some people is that they're not very lengthy. So they're usually short RCs, and usually there are only about 3 questions per RC. So that might help with the RC bit if you are the sort who loses focus after a while. And decision making is like course of action, yes, but please go through it. Because the question types are very different. I mean, it's not just choose between these options. You might also have to sequence your courses of actions, which is the most preferred to the least preferred. Santosh, to answer your question, on the IMS portal and for our students, we do have a lot of decision-making workshops, but I'm not very sure if we are going to have a workshop on YouTube. So again, that's something that you'll just have to kind of wait and see. But for all of you, again, please don't go with a fixed target number of questions. Okay. Don't say I will solve only so many, because that can be easy and that can be challenging. So please make sure that you answer as many questions as you can answer. Don't guess just because there is negative marking for leaving questions. Anything else that anyone wants to say? Otherwise, I mean, there's no general gyan for me that I want to give. This was pretty much it. Yeah. So in case you've not really seen the IMS portal, please look at the ADMAT section. All right. And there are very specific XAT related workshops. Just go through them. There's also a video on how to crack XAT in case you haven't seen them. So in case you're a little lost for strategy or how do I distribute my time and things like that, that video is also there. And it's a pretty short video. Okay, well, essay writing is not really within the purview of today's session, but since we have time, okay. First of all, XAT essays typically are about subject areas that we are familiar with. Okay, so it's not a very difficult topic. In the past, we have also seen them give abstract topics. So in case you're unfamiliar with how to deal with abstract essays, please do some research on that, because the way that we interpret poetry is kind of similar to how you would interpret an abstract topic as well. In an abstract topic, you have to start with your interpretation of the topic and then talk about how it is exemplified in the real world. So the way that you deal with it is slightly different from the way that you would deal with a more factual or a controversial topic. But on the whole, the topic is not going to be something that you're completely unfamiliar with. The only thing that you should probably do is to look at some of the previous year's essay topics. Sometimes there is a choice, sometimes there's no choice, and practice writing. I mean, it's not just thinking of points that is important. It is also being able to convert those points onto paper or, on the screen in this case. So practice writing with a fixed time limit. Don't worry about what you're writing. Just make sure that you get it done. And by the time that you've written maybe about 3 or 4 essays, I think that's good enough. And the usual stuff. I mean, you need to have about 3 to 4 paragraphs. You need to have paragraphs. Generally, check your grammar. Grammar doesn't have to be perfect, but you cannot be making a mistake in every sentence. Basic stuff. It's not something that you need to worry about excessively. All right. So I guess thank you so much for being here. Let's end today's session. And I hope that you guys continue to support IMS. And I also hope that, you continue to post your queries so that we have something to respond to. Bye-bye. Good night.